Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's seminar in the seminar series Worth Knowing. According to the GDPR rules or law, I have to inform you that this seminar will be broadcasted. And if you stand in front of the camera or asks questions, then you will be on the film. So today we have two seminars, one with René van der Wal, Department of Ecology. Where does citizen science come from and do we need it? And then after René, Team Hofmeester, Department of Wildlife, Fish, Environmental Studies, we'll talk about technology as a gateway to let people experience wildlife and contribute to science. And because when this seminar is broadcasted and we have it on film, we also would like to have your questions in the film. So therefore, there will be no questions during the talks and not between the talks, but after the talks. We open up for questions, and then I will go around with the microphone and take up your questions. But then we start with René. Welcome.
So what is citizen science? Where does it come from? Do we need it? And if so, how do we get it right? So these are the four aspects I would like to discuss with you today. So whatever it is, it's mightily successful. So there's new projects virtually every day worldwide. You can see here in the graph on the left the number of projects rocketing over time. And on the top right, number of papers flowing from it, published papers dealing with citizen science methodology. And across the disciplines, which are very, very wide-ranging, but it's very clear that if you can see that at the bottom, ecology is discipline number one. And this is something we'll come back to. It's also important then to realize that this term citizen science is relatively new. So in the 90s, is when that terminology came up. There was citizen science as we know it, much before that, but the terminology is new. And instantly there were two people, Rick Bonney from the US and Alan Irwin from the UK, and they came up with these ideas at the same time, but from very, very different perspectives. Rick Bonney talked about science communication, partnership between people in society and scientists. And Alan Irwin was interested in co-discovery of policy-relevant science, so democratizing science, as it were. Two strands of citizen science, UK, US, or you guess who wins? As always, the US. This is the definition that made it into the Oxford English Dictionary, which indicates already how prolific citizen science is. Scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, often in collaboration with and under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. So the kind of Irwin notion that democratizing science is lost from the definition, and we'll come back to that. If we look at some of the key players, then by far the most prolific is Cornell University. And they have their citizen science portal and fantastic resources they built around eBird. What is really important to realize is their capacity. They bring observations of people from birds together for the US and well beyond that to map, in this case, the migration routes of cranes. Phenomenally complex structures they built, but they built from a known resource. People who are interested in birds, people who are good at birding. In that sense, a lot of the citizen science we see is a reflection of long-term recording biological skills in society and people with deep interest in that. And hence, the likes of eBird being able to be very successful to capitalize that energy. There's also a different kind of citizen science with people where the wider public is at work. And that's much harder. But also very, very important. And there's a lot of guidance now available, like in this document here, where you can learn how to get this relationship between members of the public and scientists brokered. If we ask why citizen science is so prolific, then the answer is not simple. But there are about 5 key elements to this. First, there's a general tendency in Western societies for less top-down, less expert-based approaches to governance structures, where people are invited into the process, whether that's no matter what process it is, but basically a more participatory or inclusive form of operation. And citizen science is one of those participatory operations. There's a great desire for better understanding already from the 70s or 60s, arguably, for policies that ensure scientific learning and understanding of the public of science. Environmentally, and remember, citizen science is most prolific in the kind of ecology realm. There's deep concern about the state of our planet, and that has triggered a lot of interest in knowing about nature. Conventions, Ramsar, Bonn, Convention of Biological Diversity, are reflections of that concern. And on top of that, there's a great worry about the lack of connection between people and nature, and that adds to the mix. The backdrop of this, or you could say the result, is a desire for an insatiable amount of data, fine-scaled, large-scaled, almost as detailed as one can get. That's possible now because of digital technology, and these kind of interact, and collectively they make citizen science as prolific as we see it today. If you look at citizen science, and there's all sorts of different levels of participation you could see. Most projects, as you can see, these funny clouds, dots meaning a number of projects in our analysis. Most projects are contributory, where scientists take observations from the public volunteering data, as it were. But in many cases, that's the end of the story. Some are more collaborative, where there's really working together, and some are outright co-created, or maybe even driven by non-scientists. And that's, of course, something which is relatively rare. If you ask what's best, then depends on best for what. So arguably, the top model, contributory, is best for academic papers. The bottom line, you could argue, is best for society. Do we need citizen science? I would say yes. But you would, of course, expect me to say that. This is data from GBIF, over 1.6 million records. The colors indicate where we know something about species. That's what we know of nature, all generated by citizen science. There's no shortage of environmental concerns, so these concerns will need to be addressed. And of course, there's a lot of democratic issues at stake, both in society at large and also how science is done. In that sense, I think there's a lot of scope for the both forms of citizen science, the participatory side and the kind of democratizing citizen science. If we look at citizen science projects, then what is really quite striking is that people are really, really positive about it, which is great, but it has this attitude of we can all do it, no matter what. But it doesn't mean that there are no issues, and I think it's really important to realize what issues there are in order to be able to address them. The 2 key issues, or key fault lines you could say, are these 2. That on one hand we have those who know, scientists and naturalists, and those who are unskilled. And that's a dichotomy which is not particularly desired. And there's enormous tension, that's the second point, between the generation of research as well as the generation of outreach, if you like. Picking up on this first point, there's major concerns about data quality, but also many studies stressing that this is not an issue in citizen science. That some of this data is difficult to handle because of the unstructured nature, and others saying this doesn't really matter. And also that some of the data gathered in the process seems data for citizen science sake, but not really clearly used. And again, people saying, well, you know, the big data narrative, we don't need hypotheses. In that sense, these issues pop up all the time and need to be dealt with. There's also concerns about this contributory model of citizen science where people bring data but get very little back. I think that is indeed potentially exploitative if we don't make sure to think through what people can get back. And we need to be honest what citizen science data are for. And that is, I think, key to any science you do. I think overcoming this dichotomy of skilled people and unskilled people is really, really important. And ideally, you want to make sure that that people respect each other's skills and collectively resolve issues. I'll skip that. Outreach and research are things which are very difficult to combine. And I think there's a general recognition that many citizen science projects are good in generating science. Many citizen science projects are very good in connecting with people, but finding this ideal mix is really difficult. But that's exactly where we have to be. And we have to recognize that if you stray off in either the left or right direction, you compromise. You can do that by developing a portfolio of approaches, but you need to recognize this trade-off. I think absolutely key to resolving these issues is knowing why we do things. So why, as scientists, would we engage with these approaches? Why do we expect people in society to contribute? And what do we know of each other? Do we understand where we stand? It's very little work done on this, but I'll give you a flavor. And this report actually is the best source at hand. And it's no surprise that the key motivation of scientists, and this is UK-based, is advancing scientific knowledge. Scientists ought to say that. But if you look at more a wider set of motivations, then they are very, very diverse. Policy informing, raising awareness, building partnerships. But also, and interestingly enough, this last block of aspects, a lot of personal aspirations. And I think we shouldn't forget about that. We're not machines that are generating good science. A lot of people are in there because of very strong personal beliefs, to make a difference in society, to harness enthusiasm, amongst others. If it comes to motivations of the contributors, we perhaps know even less. But there is consensus that it will be complex, which is of course easy to say. What we found out in our own studies is that these 4 words, learning, contributing, joining and helping, are key. They're key to environmental volunteering in general. And in one project, Bee-Watch, what we find is almost like, it's the 2 kind of aspects of learning and helping that really makes a difference for people, why they knock on our doors. In this case, it's through species identification tools we built, which then makes people contribute to an initiative. But it's really understanding where contributors come from in order to build good platforms. You can ask yourself, so how do we get citizen science right? Well, there's no easy answer, but I'll give you 4 starting points. I think the most important starting point is, why would you do it? Don't do it because it's fashionable, but you have to ask, why do I think this is the right approach for the questions at hand, or for what I want to achieve in life, in academic life or scientific life? What should be achieved? So make very, very clear what your aims are and communicate those. Because in many citizen science projects, the aims are not there, it's drifting. And many people who contribute don't actually know what initiative they contribute to. Who should be involved? And many citizen science projects would suggest it's suitable for all, but that doesn't really work. If you think of, for example, giving something back, creating feedback, you need to know what section of population you deal with. It's very different dealing with kids compared to adults, let's say. And also ask yourself, so why do I think they would be keen to get involved and understand their motivations better? And finally, how to do it, how to go about. I think 2 aspects are key here. One, is respect for knowledge and expertise of participants. They know a heck of a lot. In many cases, far more than scientists will ever know. But they might know it in different ways, and we need to learn from that. And the other is to make sure that we don't exploit, but provide opportunities for learning and give people a chance to shape the process of citizen science. And keep doing it. And only that way we'll drive at successful citizen science. Thank you.
So then it's Tim's turn. Welcome.
Yes, so now for something completely different. Or actually not that different, because they are really nicely linked, although we didn't really rehearse or talk too much about our two different presentations. So I will be talking a bit more from personal experience and a bit more about technology, but it's linking really nicely to a lot of the things that René just talked about. So just as a kind of a background in terms of why I think we should do citizen science and why I think citizen science is important, is because we see all over the globe, we see urbanization, so there's more and more people living in cities, and we see exactly the same in Sweden, where cities are growing, and so there's a lot of people that are living in cities and that are being born in cities and never have lived on the countryside. And linked to this, we see this extinction of experience, or I think last child in the woods was the term that René just used, where there's a loss of human-nature interaction. So that's one of the things that I kind of will be talking about. And partly it's not that weird that there's this loss of human-nature interaction if people are living in cities, because it's actually relatively hard. I mean, of course, there's not as much wildlife in cities as there is outside of cities, or maybe there is, but then they're harder to see. So there's this really nice paper in Science where they showed that for a lot of mammal species, they're actually more nocturnal in places where there's a lot of people, which makes sense, but it also means that they are active at times that we are not active. So it's relatively hard to encounter them. So as a maybe as a consequence of that, or maybe just as a general trend in society, we see that people, or children especially, are not necessarily learning about wildlife anymore by being outside in the forest, but they're learning about wildlife through media. So they're watching Animal Planet, they're watching Nat Geo Wild, which doesn't necessarily mean that they know less about wildlife. They just know something about wildlife that is not here in Sweden, but wildlife that is, well, as you can see, both the pictures they use to promote themselves are from Africa, so that also tells you something. But I think, especially as we're now living in this age of technology, we see an increased use of technology to experience wildlife, and I think we can actually use that. So one thing that I spend a lot of, or I think far too much time on as a student, was watching these AfriCams. So I think it was just starting when I was a student, where you could just go to a website, watch a webcam live at some waterhole in the Serengeti or in South Africa, and actually follow whatever was happening there. And then it's far more fun to watch a warthog drinking water than to study for your exam. And there's actually a lot of people that are doing this. But there's also examples where media or larger networks are using this. So a very well-known example is the BBC Springwatch, who have live webcams at nests of all kinds of animals that you can follow. And there's, I don't know how many millions of people watching that. Of course, we had our own Swedish example last spring, which was a really big success, where basically most of the time you were watching water flowing by and birds singing, but every now and then there was some funny reindeer or moose. I mean, I don't know how you were experiencing this, but I had one screen, Stura Älgvandring, and then on the other screen I was working. And then we see more and more that people are actually having webcams or cameras in their gardens to look at their local wildlife. So this is a bit of a small slide. I had hoped to have a picture, but unfortunately, or a movie, but unfortunately it didn't work. But this was it's a man in Denmark, and he just put up a camera trap in his garden, and he started getting footage of stone martens. And I've been working on stone martens and other small carnivores, so he contacted me about certain behavior he saw, and he had all kinds of theories and ideas, and I still hope that we can do at some point something with all this footage. But I'm sure that he's not, or no, I know for sure that he's not the only one, because I've been part of Facebook groups where they just share pictures of stone martens or urban foxes, all kinds of wildlife that can occur in your garden that you can film with the wildlife camera. And yeah, nowadays you can get these things for like 50 euros at Aldi. So it's not something that I mean, the technology is not limiting anymore. So one of the big questions that I thought was, can we actually use this technology to let people experience nature? And apparently people are already doing that, so why not actually join that? But then especially, can we then actually learn something from that, and also let them contribute to science? So that's where the citizen science is finally coming in. And then there's this thing that René just mentioned, this divide between basically non-professional experts, so the people that are reporting butterflies or bees or all kinds of things where you actually have you need some expert knowledge to be able to report these things, versus the the idea about, or how do you say that, the philosophy of some people about citizen science, that everybody should be able to participate. And there we see, and also not only in terms of required knowledge, but also in terms of required skills. A lot of people say if you want to have good data, you need a good protocol, and you need people that are understanding this protocol, can actually follow this protocol. So you need a certain knowledge level in order to be able to do that. So it's often being seen as this trade-off. Either you have low data quality and a lot of people involved, or you have high data quality and only few people involved. But there's not something in between. And well, as René showed, you see this in things like eBird or Artportale, where at least as a basis you need some kind of species information, or need some knowledge in order to identify species. And of course there's being all kinds of developments there as well, that you can send in an image and then people can either help you with the identification, or some platforms are now using AI to then help you with the identification. But still the idea behind it is that people have some basic knowledge and then contribute. And then another issue with a lot of these things, but then of course you can again discuss if it's an issue or not, is that generally effort is not recorded. So we only know somebody was there at some point recording some species, but we don't know how often was there somebody there not recording the species, which we need for quite some models. So there I think we can actually use technology to overcome that problem. And then I'm mainly talking about all kinds of wildlife sensors, as I like to call them. So it's things like camera traps, or you can also call them trail camera, or there's too many terms maybe. But it's basically a video or photo camera with a motion sensor. Or acoustic sensors, so these sensors that hear a sound and then start recording. And the nice thing about these things is that they give us an identifiable voucher, so we have a picture or a sound recording that we can actually check back on. Is this the species that somebody reported or not? Also, we know if we record when people put out these things and pick them up again, we have some idea of effort. And then we can either use experts or more and more AI to help identify species and make that in a quicker process, where at some point hopefully it will be real time. So I just started a project which I just wanted to mention because all of you can be part of it, which is called Meet Your Wild Neighbors. And the idea is that we use cameras in people's backyards, so everybody can borrow a camera from SLU, put it in their backyard for a month and see which animals are there. Of course, we then want to give people feedback on which species did they record, and if they want to know something about that or learn something about that. But also we just want to, as one of these ideas of citizen science is to educate people, we try to educate our participants. But also, and that's something I think is really important, I'm asking everybody for their own stories. Which animals did you see, and do you have some ideas about when the animals are actually in your garden or not? So they can hopefully help generate hypotheses that we can then test with the data. And we're surveying their attitudes and reasons for participation. So also looking at well, these things that René showed. Which type of people are participating, and are we actually reaching a large kind of this wide range of people that I want to reach, or are we still only reaching people that can identify the species by themselves and are already nature oriented? So just some short results. So we have, we started 2 months ago. We have the first 27 participants that had a camera in their garden for 1 month, and they're spread all over the community. But as you can see, there's still quite some empty gaps in this community. So if you live in any of the squares that are not blue, you can register and have a camera for a month if you want. So far we recorded 5 mammal species and many birds, but of course also all kinds of pets that we're interested in, like cats and dogs. As I'm a mammologist, I just want to show you some nice pictures of urban wildlife here in Umeå. So we have a lot of people that actually said, oh well, I have roe deer in my garden every now and then, and we see them on the camera. Some people actually had the idea that they saw more roe deer than we saw on the cameras. Some people had the idea that they hadn't seen the roe deer, but they were actually on the cameras. So there's a really interesting thing of seeing maybe actually just people recording that they see a roe deer would work better. But then we have this really nice example of badgers, which we photographed in the middle of Umeå city and in the middle of the night. And actually none of the participants that had a badger in their garden had previously seen a badger in their garden, so they didn't know that they existed there. So we could tell them a bit about badger ecology. Then we are seeing more and more foxes which look like they have symptoms of scabies. So that's now one of the things that we're looking into, is kind of what is the risk of scabies for pets, and try to inform people about that as well. And then of course we have some very common species that almost everybody sees in their garden, and we know that are there, but we don't know that much about their ecology in urban settings. And one of them is mountain hares, which maybe some of you actually can see them every now and then from your windows, because I know they are around here on campus, and I've seen quite some pictures on YouTube and Facebook of mountain hares here on campus. So that's one of the things that we know exists there, but we don't know that much about their ecology. And then of course squirrels, which is one of those examples where a lot of people are actually happy to have them in the garden. So there's also again kind of looking at why do people like squirrels in the garden or not. So it's a lot of things that we want to do, but hopefully we still have the time to do that. Sorry for that. So we just started a survey to look at their attitudes towards wildlife. And then we want to see, do participants actually learn from this experience of being part of the project, which is one of the things that is often stated as a good reason to do citizen science. And then especially something that has been proposed but not really tested yet, is that participants might also change their behavior due to participation in citizen science, which is, I think, a really interesting thing that potentially to develop. So just by a very short vision of how I think the future could look like, or how maybe I hope the future looks like. I guess all of you have totally different ideas of the future, but I just want to share this. So at some point, especially now with Internet of Things, a lot of people already have sensors in their home. They might already have sensors in their garden. So just linking up these sensors to a network or to some kind of system. So if there is a bird singing in the garden or here outside of the office, that we actually get a ping message on an app saying, well, this AI identified that there's now a blackbird singing in your garden. It looks like this, it sounds like this, and if you want to know more information about the species, look further, or just look outside of the window and actually see it. And I think in that way we can both educate people and use technology to bring back some of the experiences, because of course you can say, well, your experience is different if there's technology in between, but I think nobody really cares about the fact that if you go on holiday, that now you use Google Maps to navigate rather than look at a paper map and I don't know, have 2 hours of argument because you went left instead of right. It doesn't mean that your holiday is less valuable. So I think we can make some really nice steps there. So that was it for me. No, that's actually not true. I have one more commercial slide because I didn't really fit this in. But I'm working together with other colleagues at SLU in a Vinnova-funded project, which is called ARCS, Arenas for Cooperation Through Citizen Science. And we're building this platform to inform people about citizen science, to collect citizen science projects, basically to bring scientists and the public together in terms of citizen science. So if you're interested in that, you can go to midborgerforskning.se or talk to me or any of the other colleagues in ARCS. So that really was it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you both, René and Tim, for inspiring talks. I invite René up on the stage, and I open up for questions. Do we have any questions? Good.
Thanks a lot, both of you. I have a question to René about the disciplines, the academic disciplines involved in citizen science. Do you think there's a difference in academics coming from the natural sciences or from the social sciences in approaching citizen science? And then can we increase kind of the value or come up with novel approaches by interdisciplinary projects that have that enter this citizen science?
Yeah, thank you for the question, very interesting question. I think you're very right. I think the citizen science done in the social science realm is far more sensitive to people's personal agendas, as you would expect from social scientists. So they're better educated in that sense than many natural scientists. A lot of productive citizen science projects also involving in the ecological realm or environmental science realm capitalizes on knowledge from different disciplines. So wherever disciplines meet, new approaches are born. And I think the only way to truly start to work on issues in society is for disciplines to pair up. There's almost no issue in society which is monodisciplinary. They don't just come that way. So in that sense, I very much appreciate your sentiment and question. We need to learn from the social sciences how they do citizen science.
Thank you for wonderful presentations. I have two general questions to both of you. First one is, what kind of measures would you like to suggest to involve more and more people in it? Like, how would you try to educate them on mass measures? And also, if you would like to suggest if those people should be rewarded or like kind of, so that they are encouraged to do such things, and also more people are getting involved.
Yeah. You can start, and I have some time to think. No. No.
That's unfair. In terms of reward structures, I think it is very important to know that people are being rewarded. But it's also important to make sure that the rewards don't become some sort of external drive, because it is intrinsic motivation that ultimately will carry things through. So there's a balance to strike. But I think it is important for us to think through how we can recognize contributions made. Very important, and I think that doesn't happen enough. And that's indeed why I ended my slide as I did. In terms of what of data to gather, I personally don't mind. What I think is really important in citizen science is that you can use that methodology, that partnership, to collectively learn on whatever topic works. I think urban environments are a very good realm. It's our realm. It's where we unfortunately dwell far too large proportion of our time. And it's where people are close to nature. That maybe not the African nature, the spectacular nature you can see on telly. It's the nature that matters to people. So I think picking a topic or working out with people what are sensible topics are the way forward. And I have worked a lot with people in gardens, like Tim has as well. We've done a lot of work on bumblebees. The only reason why we've done that is that they're popular and people are inspired by them. And by having them taking part in citizen science initiatives, we actually can get people to change how they look at their garden, whether they use pesticides or not. Not is the answer in many cases. So there are simple approaches by picking the right question, the right organism, and the right sphere. You can make a difference. So it's about thinking through what works best.
Yeah, I want to add to that. As you say, I mean, it might not be that every project can really have everybody involved. But I think one way of getting more people involved, and often is now the case, is by having really good science communication. or just communication in general. So, and yeah, I think that's one of the most important things of doing a citizen science project, which might not always be as appreciated by each of the person doing it, is that goes a really big effort into reaching people that could potentially participate, but also reaching the one, or basically giving feedback to the ones that already did participate, to keep them involved and to keep them interested in staying part of the project. And yeah, I don't think there's a one way to that would work for all projects. So it would really depend on the project. But I know some really nice examples from the US where they did citizen science more on a kind of environmental health side. For example, looking at the type of plumbing that people have in their houses, and then the amount of heavy metals in their drinking water. And there you reach they spend a lot of effort in reaching the people for which this actually most matters, because they are not the ones who might, for example, look at the university website to see if there's a project they can participate in. I think it really depends on the topic and which type of people you're trying to reach, to come up with how to best reach them. But I agree with René that I think there should be at least some intrinsic curiosity of participants to participate, and definitely not like a monetary reward or something like that. At least that's what I think. But again, it might it might depend.
Maybe the scientific publication should reach till them, and then they will understand that okay, we have really contributed to something. We have contributed to the science or something like that. So that is not really monetary, but like kind of a real reward, I would say.
Definitely. I think that feedback is something that is really it's really important, and is also noticed by a lot of review articles that are looking at which citizen science projects are successful and which ones are not. That often feedback to participants is one of is quite a key issue. Yeah.
Time is running out, and I think that both René and Tim will be able to stay a few minutes, so you can come up here and ask them questions after we have finished this session. It's a growing area, citizen science, and it's worthwhile discussing it more. We have one more lecture in this seminar series this season, and it's the 4th of December when Svetlana Zarela will talk about global biomass mapping through NASA's JEDI mission, 4th of December. So I welcome you back then. And as you all know, you can find the filmed versions of all the seminars on the web and see them over and over again. But thank you for great seminars. Thanks.